That's me on Twitter. And I'm going to talk to you about, we all use this term ecosystems a lot in technology, and I actually have a background in addition to being with the Beastie Boys, so I can drop science, right? I have a master's in forestry and a PhD in ecology. So when we were talking about things that might be interesting, meta, right? This is meta. This whole talk is meta, but comes back to technology. There's actually cute, fluffy animals in my talk. I have a background in ecology, and we, in technology a lot, talk about ecosystems, right? Here's the Drupal ecosystem that we like to talk about, right? And then this is my favorite ecosystem slide. I don't know, well, we can copy that or cover that up. But this is somebody's idea of an ecosystem, right? And we as technologists like to throw like my developer ecosystem and my partner ecosystem and an ecosystem of server pieces that we put together. And if you're going to pick up one end of the stick, which is to say I'm going to use the word ecosystem, I'm challenging the community to pick up the other end of the stick, which is actually really talk about an ecosystem, not just talk about a buzzword. All right? So we're going to talk science. Actually, wait, science, right? That's what we're going to be doing here today. So, okay, first science. Who is paying attention in botany class or in life? What tree is that? Willow. See, I'm going to start easy and then I'll ramp up on you. So the willow tree, what is one of the most famous things about the willow tree? Besides all the Shakespeare and all the other stuff and Pocahontas movie? Aspirin, right? It's salicylic acid. You chew on a willow branch and it makes your headache and your fever go away. Felix Hoffmann. Why is he famous? Because he did science and a simple model, right? So he simplified the world. Is this really what an atom looks like from what we know right now? Yeah. Wrong, it is. No, just kidding. No, it doesn't look anything like this, right? It's a simplification. And this is what science usually does all the time. They take models of the world and then use that model to make inference and do great things. So he took a simple model of how atoms go together and made aspirin, right? Which, despite commercial interests, did a lot of good during that big flu epidemic in 1914 or whenever it was, right? And so that was science to do scaling. So here's some more science. This probably reminds you of your primary school. Is that what you call it in England? Primary school? Yeah. Okay. I want to speak the language while I'm in the country. This is your basic ecosystem. This is an old one. Can anyone tell what computer this was probably printed off of? A Mac. Whoever said that is exactly right. That's like that nice, typical Mac font. But this is an ecosystem, right? There's like animals dying and vultures eating them and nutrients moving around, and you've got like nutrients and animals and plants and everything's connected and you've got stuff moving, right? That's an ecosystem. Not the flat line going across, okay? So, conservation, it's a simple model, but conservation biologists use this model. And how do they use it? Very early on in the endangered species work, we realized that single species conservation biology is basically emergency room conservation biology at best. By the time you get to that single species, you usually end up, it's in the emergency room, and you may or may not lose it, right? And you're spending a whole lot of money to try to save it. So we need to do better at that. That's a gold eagle. That's a juvenile bald eagle, by the way. See, that's the first animal. More are coming. So where did it really start? Where was the first time there was the application of ecosystem management? For those in the front, can you read what that says? This is a freebie for the front. For those who sucked up and sat in the front so they could be good students. Yellowstone, right? And Yellowstone is actually huge. This is about 10 miles. Yellowstone is about 3,500 square miles, which I looked up is about 1/3 the size of Belgium. For those going to FOSDEM, you could say I could fit 3 Yellowstones into Belgium. But if you look at the satellite image of Yellowstone, you can see some of the political boundaries right here, which is pretty amazing. That's actually a biological boundary that matches the political boundary because of management. Can anyone name another one of those? Very famous one in the Middle East. The border on the side between Israel and Egypt on the Sinai. They put a big fence up. Anyway, it's a long discussion, and I only got 20 minutes this time. Can't talk about it. But the point is, and plus it's a political minefield, right? So let's just move on. The point is, though, that Yellowstone is situated within a larger ecosystem That's Yellowstone National Park. Everything in green around it is actually part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So it's a large, huge area. And what was some of the animals that drove ecosystem management was grizzly bears in Yellowstone National Park and wolves. I mean, not those wolves, these wolves. Sorry. These wolves, right, who range over really large areas. And if you look at their food web, that's wolves and that's bears. And what do you notice about this picture is that there's lots of lines connecting lots of things. So to save bears and wolves, you can't just get DDT out of the environment. You can't just put up some nest trees and suddenly you'll get wolves and bears, right? You have to manage the entire ecosystem. So I'm going to be talking about ecosystem management today. I'm only going to talk about a few points. Ecosystems are multidimensional. You have to keep that in mind. Always collect and synthesize primary data. So this is the science of ecosystem management. You always have to engage in monitoring. There was a new term that came up around this, which is called adaptive management, and I'll explain what that means in a little bit. And the last is values are more important than facts and logic, which is kind of the sad part. So I'm going to start there. So values and goals. This all comes from social and economic and political sphere. It's actually the most important. So I'm going to sit here and talk about all the great science, but in my conservation biology work, like we would do these great habitat conservation plans, and we'd do lots of science, and then somebody from the wind power company would talk to somebody at the federal agency, and they'd say, we'll give $10 million and we'll do this. And they would say, fine, deal done, and none of the science matters. So my point, even though that's depressing at a certain level, this is actually the most important part. And it's the hardest part, and I don't have anything to say about it other than it's not science or quantitative, but it drives everything. And you, as a manager of an ecosystem, whether it's technology or developers or something, need to work this out with your company, your organization beforehand, because you could be part of like the Apache Foundation. It doesn't have to be a company. But if you're trying to manage an ecosystem, this has to get done first, before you do the science. Okay? But now let's go back to science, because that's the part I like. So, some ecology principles. All right, this is a sea otter. This is where we all go, oh, right? This is the warm fuzzy part. That's a sea otter. Why is it important? This is what happens when you take sea otters out of the ecosystem. In the back is what it looks like when you allow sea otters to be in the ecosystem. Sea otters are what are called a keystone species, right? Here you have healthy diversity and lots of different members of the ecosystem with sea otters in it. You take them out, and you end up with sea urchins and starfish and plankton, right? And that's what we don't consider a healthy community, right? So sea otters are keystone species. They drive the entire ecosystem by their presence. Another one is a beaver, right? For wetlands, it doesn't have to be the main predator. It just has to be something that alters the environment in such a way that it basically sets up the whole environment. So otters are keystone species. So when you're managing your ecosystem, who are the keystones in your ecosystem? So I'll give you an example from us. It might be, if you're developing a developer ecosystem, it might be the alpha developers, right? Those ones whose blogs everybody reads and whose tweets everyone follows. Like, you need those in your ecosystem because they're going to drive the whole thing. They're going to drive the buzz. That could be one idea for who could be a keystone in your species, in your ecosystem. So think about that relative to your ecosystem. Now, Steve, you've gotten prepped on this one before. Steve, I gave this one to Steve at Monktoberfest because I thought he would get it right away. Steve, who is that? A Manhattan, that's right. That's a Manhattan, which is a bait fish, and Steve's a fisherman. So why we care about Manhattan is these are trawlers who are going to take Manhattan and turn it into fish oil, right? And so we basically said, oh, they produce tons of babies. There's tons of Manhattan. We can never get rid of them. Turns out we've harvested them so intensively that we've changed the diet of all these species that live in that count on them in the Chesapeake Bay. Right? So osprey, it's gone from 75% to 24%. So for every species that counted on Manhattan, we've reduced it by basically fishing it out. Right? Manhattan is crucial to the system because so many eat it. Like back in the Denali one, let's go back to Denali just for a second. Another example of those in the Denalis are ground squirrels and mice, right? A lot of animals depend on those. They're not keystones, but if you get rid of them, a whole bunch of things are going to collapse. So my question to you is, who is your Manhattan in your ecosystem? So I'm going to give an example again back to platform as a service space or developer ecosystem. It's the day in and day out developers, right? You have to get all the developers who aren't on the cutting edge, but you need lots of them into your funnel to keep your developer ecosystem going. Because if you don't get them in there, the whole ecosystem collapses. There's nothing to drive the ecosystem as a whole. Okay, so think of who are the Manhattan in your ecosystem. All right, so here we're going to go do some adaptive management. Experiments. Planned means you put some forethought into it, and natural experiments. Natural experiments came out of ecology, but it's also been used in political science and psychology now, right? The key to natural experiments is you need long-term monitoring before. So I'm going to give 2 examples from OpenShift here. So adaptive management, the idea with adaptive management is you're always doing experiments with your management activities. Like before, in terms of craft, what people would do is they would basically take dead deer and throw them out and see how the wolves or the bears did, and there was basically like, oh, we'll try this, now we'll try that, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do that, but there was no science to it. Adaptive management says, let's do a survey, but instead of the normal A/B, because we're an open source product, we said, let's do one email that says, take the survey. Am I out? No. Okay. Let's do one type of the survey that basically says, come take our survey, and we'll give you a gift card. And the other one was, as a member of our open source community, we really look to your contribution and all sorts of things like that. And from these 2 proportions of the answerings of we just looked at, were they more likely to respond? Right? Not their answers, just could we get a better response rate? And the answer is no. Right? For those of you who know statistics, when your confidence interval goes from negative to positive and goes through 0, that means you had absolutely no effect. Right? Which is sad for me, because I was kind of hoping that we would show something exciting, but no result is a result, right? One other thing about statistical results, it's back here. I'm going to put the slides up on the slideshare, read them later. For those who know statistics or care, there's a difference between type 2 and type 1 error. This is controlling for type 1 error, and type 1 error is saying there's a difference when there's not, right? Type 2 error is saying there's no difference when there is. And those are actually 2 very important ways to think about error, and you have to decide which are better. Don't hold on to that thought, just remember it's on the slide, okay? Just let it go. So what actions, when you do, just let it go, let it wash over you. What actions can you turn into an experiment, right? Stop just doing things like, oh, we'll try this, let's try that now. Like when you do that, you have no sense of whether it actually worked. You're like, your numbers are better as compared to what, right? There's no control, there's nothing around it. Okay, natural experiments. This is the Everglades. Everybody, well, maybe not in the back row, but everybody should be able to read that. Very large park in the United States again. And you cannot do experiments in the Everglades because of this guy, or this female actually, this lady. That is the Florida panther, and they are in danger. And they will not let you do experiments there because, oh, we accidentally killed one of the 10 panthers that was left. Right? That just generally doesn't go over well. So you're not allowed to do experiments around them. But sometimes nature creates an experiment for you. This is Hurricane Andrew ripping through the Everglades, right? And so the example that we got with OpenShift for something like this, we've been doing monitoring, long-term monitoring.
Oh wait, did you say OpenShift? This is the pitch. Cut it, we're done.
Are we really done?
No, you're fine. Okay.
I didn't think about the pitch part, because I'm not saying, here at OpenShift, this is the way we're envisioning our new product in the future. So, this paint bar is our sign-up numbers over time. Notice there's no scale. No scale. Legal likes that. Right? Each dot is a month, but I'll give you a little hint. That peak is about 3 million sign-ups for that month. That's no way, guys. There's no way. Well, in our case, there is. All right, so then that's the trend for the whole United States. This blue line is Philadelphia. And what we had is we had some users who really liked OpenShift in Philadelphia, and they kept us coming back for events over a particular summer. So here you can see one of our sign-up events, and then we had 2 events right here. So the hypothesis I put with the long-term monitoring data we did was, would we get a snowball if we concentrated a lot of events in a particular geography, right? Is it better to spend your money doing a bunch of events in one town, or should you spread it over? This yellow line is a city that's similar size to Philadelphia, and it's the number of signups for it as well. And what you can see is there is no long-term effect. Yet again, all my hypotheses come to naught. Now you can see why I did not go into academia. So what you can see is there's a small little boost right here in between the two events, but it tends to wear off over time. So there's no evidence from this one experiment that concentrating your efforts in a particular city will boost your numbers. Like there's no snowballing where suddenly, what I was hoping was, we do 2 events, and then we're on like wildfire and the hockey stick. And then we IPO. Oh, we already IPO like 10 years ago. All right. So what monitoring are you doing, right? I couldn't have done that if we weren't doing any monitoring. So think about what type of monitoring you're doing already in your ecosystem, and if you're not, what are you going to start doing? But remember, all of these questions are driven by your values and your goals from the beginning. It's not just monitoring for monitoring's sake. Okay, and so then what adaptations can you also make based on the knowledge gained? That's the adaptive management, right? Like we tried it and we change it. So the take-homes from my talk, if there are any, are be more quantitative, right? Rather than just saying, I think this is a good idea, try to measure stuff. Do experiments, don't just do, right? Like I would love to see Rafe and his group do experiments around some of the stuff they're trying. Like look at productivity in those 2 different ways. Take advantage of natural experiments. They happen to ecosystems all the time. And as long as you have monitoring in place, you can ask some really interesting questions. Manage your ecosystem for key indicators. Diversity is important. And take the analogy of ecosystems farther and learn from them. And that's it. Thanks, everyone.